Maybe you've heard something about the EU's latest anti-deforestation law, officially titled the Regulation on Deforestation-Free Products. The EU Deforestation Regulation, or EUDR for short, has been stirring the global pot recently, with many warning of dire consequences should it be enforced immediately, leading to it being delayed last year. Hello, my name is Fairlight-Olsen. I'm a student at Georgetown University studying international politics along with environmental studies. In this podcast, I'll take you on a deep dive into the EUDR, what it's trying to do, how it's been received globally, and what its future might look like. So, to get started, the EUDR has several key objectives. According to the European Commission website, its goals include preventing products on the European market from contributing to the degradation or deforestation of forests anywhere in the world, further decreasing the EU's carbon output from the consumption of commodities regulated under the EUDR by a minimum of 32 million metric tons annually, and providing special consideration of deforestation or forest degradation for agriculture connected to its listed commodities. Obviously, this has serious implications, and not just for Europe, but for source countries around the world that provide the materials and products which land on the European market. The European Parliament holds Europe responsible for roughly 10% of global deforestation because of its consumption, with other sources putting that number at 15%. So, given the Union's clear effort to be global leaders on the green transition, this regulation really makes sense. This also underscores the scale of deforestation around the world that this regulation is trying to curb. The EUDR was supposed to take effect in December of 2024, but it's been delayed for a year, and now large companies will have to abide by its regulations on December 30th, 2025, with small and medium companies being also required to obey before July of 2026. It's worth noting that the EUDR is not the first effort of the EU to regulate deforestation. It actually repeals the EU Timber Regulation, and it follows the 2019 Commission communication on stepping up EU action to protect and restore the world's forests, as well as the famous European Green Deal, and the EU Biodiversity Strategy for 2030, as well as the Farm to Fork Strategy. So what does the EUDR actually regulate? Well, in creating it, the EU performed research to identify what products consumed in the Union were responsible for most of the deforestation. It identified 7 key products that together are responsible for more than 98% of the deforestation driven by the EU market. Palm oil and soya are the largest contributors, at 34 and 32.8% respectively, followed by wood, cocoa, coffee, cattle, and rubber, ranging from 8.6% to 3.4% respectively. The EUDR, though, does not ban any of these commodities. Instead, it mandates that they are produced in a way that does not run against its values. Under the EUDR, producers of these goods, or groups that make products containing them, will have to invest heavily in making their supply chains transparent and deforestation-free. While the EUDR equally regulates products from both countries inside and outside of the EU, regardless of EU member status, it has different requirements based on how risky it considers a country's goods to be in terms of deforestation. The lowest risk source countries, whether within or without of the EU, are subject to less oversight than the standard and high-risk countries. In order to get a product containing one of these 7 items on the EU market, businesses have to follow the following several steps. First, they have to make sure that their product did not require any deforestation to produce after the year 2020, so deforestation before 2020 can still be used. Second, the products have to meet the legislation requirements in their countries of origin. And third, companies must provide the coordinates of where their items are produced. Companies also have to do risk assessments of their products, creating deforestation in the supply chain. And should any risk be found, they need to provide and implement a mitigation plan, as well as submit a statement outlining the risks and mitigation measures to the EU. Recycled goods, though, for reuse or for repurposing, do not count in terms of EUDR regulations, although there are some exceptions. This is because the law wants to avoid disincentivizing recycling of products at the end of their service life. Obviously, complying with this regulation could get very expensive, as well as being difficult. This is particularly true for smaller suppliers with less financial capital to fund cleaning up and making transparent their supply chain, which explains why small and medium-sized businesses have to comply another 6 months down the line. Penalties only apply, though, to companies selling products in the EU or exporting products from within the EU. Companies not involved in the EU market are left completely untouched. In researching this episode, I realized that there's not a lot out there in terms of podcaster videos which both explain the EUDR, but also cover some of how it's been received globally. So now I want to talk about how it's been received. Environmental groups, unsurprisingly, have largely supported it, as have some corporations and countries. However, it's also faced significant backlash, particularly for countries that are sources of impacted goods. The European Commission and Parliament received a letter from 17 source countries that outright oppose the EUDR. Indonesia accused the EUDR of being a form of regulatory imperialism, and many other countries have argued that it is unfair. China in particular has stated that it will not allow geolocation data showing sourcing to be provided to the EU. This response makes sense in some ways. The needed adjustments to the supply chain have the potential to be extraordinarily expensive. Ghana, as an example, has already invested 50 million euros in creating a system that manages cocoa production within its borders. Many of the source countries do not have the economic resources of the EU, so complying with this regulation is difficult. In some ways, the EUDR seems to mandate that other countries pay to clean up the supply chains for the products that the EU wants, which has not been well received at all. Calls for a delay in the implementation were so strong that the EU ended up pushing back the EUDR's implementation by a whole year. This delay, though, has also received backlash, especially from environmental groups. The Rainforest Alliance, in an official response, called the delay, quote, a blatant contradiction with all EU commitments to halt global biodiversity loss and climate change. It also sets a dangerous precedent leading to the potential reopening of the crucial regulations and directives adopted as part of the EU Green Deal, end quote. Both the delay and the difficulty involved raise questions about whether the EUDR will be as effective as it's hoped. At the end of this year, will it be delayed again? Will parts of it be modified or removed to make compliance more feasible? These are questions that we don't yet have answers to. However, despite the difficulties in implementation, what is very clear is that we need more regulations like the EUDR to halt deforestation and biodiversity loss. Big, difficult, expensive, and painful policies like the EUDR are essential if we want to have a chance in mitigating climate change and the Anthropocene, and we've spent far too long kicking the ball a few years further down the road for the world. Our planet cannot afford us to continue delaying taking real action in the face of the crisis we're facing, and the EUDR represents a big step in the right direction. Thank you for listening.